Welcome to tutorial 1.8. The assignment says, traditionally, humans are understood as rational animals. Why does Descartes reject this understanding and instead claim that he is a thinking thing, using the term thinking in the broad sense? This is the outline that I'm going to propose. For the first paragraph, we're going to introduce, I suggest you introduce why he went with saying what he did about rational animals and about thinking things. That is the mind-body dualism, I think, from my reading. Descartes wanted to prove that minds are distinct from bodies. It is probable that he also wanted to show the superiority of mind over body. And secondly, I think it makes sense to talk about this rational animals conception, which is inductive, and I'll explain that in the tutorial very closely. Humans are rational animals is an inductive claim. Inductive reasoning can be doubted. And then finally, talk about the thinking thing part of the question. Deductive reasoning, and this is deductive reasoning, which I will get into in the tutorial. And deductive reasoning cannot be doubted. Reasoning deductively, existence can be affirmed is roughly the third paragraph. So you're explaining why, then you're explaining the rational animal part, then the thinking thing. Here's what it looks like as a full outline. The reason Descartes affirmed that he is a thinking thing, but denied that people are rational animals, appears to be to establish that minds and bodies are distinct substances from one another. Further, that minds are superior to bodies. Why he said this, I don't know. Why does he think that minds are superior to bodies? I don't know. Maybe it's a religious claim. Maybe it's based on his readings. Maybe it's based on his experiences. Maybe he got bugged for being a bookworm or something like that, or for having weak body. I don't know what the reason is. I don't have to explain that. It just seems like he wants to establish that minds are superior to bodies. Okay, second paragraph. Descartes rejected that humans are rational animals because that is an inductive conclusion. I'll explain induction real quick here. That relies on the inferior substance, that is the body and its senses. Because inductive reasoning requires observations and the senses. Finally, third paragraph, Descartes utilizes deductive reasoning, which relies on mind instead of the senses, to prove that he, a thinking thing, exists. Believing, probably naively, that thinking can occur without a brain, he proposed that this thinking thing is an immaterial mind. The latter argument was conspicuously not deductive, that he says that the thinking thing is an immaterial mind. Don't think that's a deductive conclusion. I'm going to go through all this stuff because it's probably not clear right now. Inductive reasoning, what is that? Well, observational science is inductive reasoning. The reason I say observational science is because there's also physics, which uses a lot of math and things like this. Math is deductive reasoning, but inductive reasoning, you're observing, you're making observations. So through empirical observations, you're drawing conclusions. That's an inductive inference. And then if we wanted to explain why is it called inductive, I think it's easy to track if you say sensations induce ideas and ideas induce judgments, something like that. So you could just kind of like get your head around why it's called inductive. Even science utilizes induction, as we said, and an inductive conclusion is probable based on the evidence given. It's not guaranteed. With deductive reasoning, the conclusion is guaranteed, and I'll explain that in a moment. Here's Descartes, all that I have up to this moment, accepted as possessed of the highest truth and certainty I received either from or through the senses. He has reason to not trust the senses now. Okay, inductive dilemma. He proposes this sort of inductive dilemma. So either A or B, and I'll get into B in a second, either A, nothing physical even exists. So how are you going to do science if nothing even exists? Then you can't trust anything that any of your findings. Okay, here's the first thing he says. I frequently during sleep believe that I perceived objects which I afterward observed I did not in reality perceive. He's just dreaming. It could be just a dream and nothing physical actually exists. So, this type of inductive reasoning would be a problem then. Some malignant demon has deceived me and all external things are nothing better than illusions or of dreams. So again, it's possible that nothing physical actually exists. So you have a reason to doubt your senses. Okay, and then also the second reason, the second possibility B, is that nothing physical can be known anyway. So he talks about this piece of wax that it used to be hard and then it melts and it's different in all of these ways, doesn't emit sound anymore. So what was it that I knew with so much distinctness in the piece of wax? I don't even know what the wax is. I don't know what anything is. Maybe my senses deceive me, and then it doesn't matter if I'm being deceived. I just can't even, I don't even know. So either way, you can't really trust your senses. You can't really trust inductive logic or your body. Your body's inferior. Either way, the senses are inferior. So what's the deductive solution? Let's explain deductive reasoning really quick here. I have 5 apples is a statement you can make. Therefore, I have 2 apples. 2 apples, when you said I have 5 apples, you've already said I have 1 apple, I have 2 apples, I have 3 apples, 4 apples, and 5 apples. You said all of those things when you said I have 5. So when you say therefore I have 2 apples, it's guaranteed that 2 apples follows from 5 apples. Okay, the conclusion I have 2 apples does not introduce any new information. We already know when you say you have 5 that you have 2. The conclusion is we say already contained, this is a conclusion, the 2 apples, that you have 2 apples. The conclusion is already contained within the premises. This is the premise, I have 5 apples. There's only one premise here. Deductions thus start with one big claim, like I have 5 apples, that contains many smaller claims, like you have 2 apples, you have 3 apples. So deductive arguments deduct or subtract from the large claim to make smaller claims. So they subtract or deduct. So that's how we can track what deductive means versus inductive. Okay, here's another example. Proposition A, George walked from home straight down the main street to school. Home, he goes from home, he walks to school, straight down. B, therefore, George walked past his teacher's house. Teacher's house, walking here is already said when you said that he walked from home to school, you implied that he already walked past the teacher's house. So proposition B is already contained within proposition A. Descartes' deductive logic, how he proves the existence of a thinking thing. This is a modus ponens argument. We won't get into what that means. And anyways, it says, 1, if an entity is thinking, then it must exist. 2, Descartes is thinking. Therefore, the thinking part of Descartes must exist. Here, existence and thinking is inside of that. Also, things that exist could not be thinking. That's why the existence category is larger than the thinking category. This is a good deductive argument. I don't think that there's a reason to really doubt that this is correct. Let's go into the mind-body dualism. Here is just a joke. It's from Men in Black, and there's this little alien inside of the mind of this robot person that the alien's controlling, kind of like a mind-body dualism. Anyways, arguments for mind-body dualism. Mind-body dualism means mind is constituted differently than body. The Cartesian mind is like a spirit or a soul. And Descartes proposed many arguments to prove dualism, and I'll go through them. And it was like he was throwing spaghetti at a wall to see which argument stuck. And he just chucking stuff at the wall, but he didn't delete anything. And I think he should have, because I don't think many of the arguments are very good, or any of the arguments are very good. But Descartes' proposal for mind-body dualism, roughly in a nutshell, here's kind of what he's saying. If a thinking thing exists, premise 1, if a thinking thing exists without contradiction, then a thinking thing must exist every time it is thinking. 2, the physical body might not exist during dreaming or whenever a deceiver chooses. Therefore, the thinking thing cannot be physical, can't be a physical body. I think that there are ways to challenge that. I'll go through his arguments and then I'll say why you can challenge it as I go through. Section 3 of Meditation 2, he talks about how existence can be immaterial. Existence does not rely on a physical body, he says. He has no proof for that, and that's pretty much a religious claim, and I don't know if it's true or not, but neither does he, neither does anybody. You can't make that claim, especially with what he's trying to do here, which is like a scientific argument. Okay, section 6 in Meditation 2, he makes an argument, admit only necessary truths. The only necessary truth is that he must be only a mind. Well, He can't prove that a brain is not necessary for thinking. And again, it seems like it's a religious claim that he's making. Awareness is not physical is another argument from section 7, meditation 2. It is plain I am not the assemblage of members called the human body. And that's just wishful thinking. He's just saying it's plain that he's not just the body, he's more than the body, that the thinking thing is the mind. That's wishful thinking. Okay. Section 7, another argument, I can exist without a material body. Section 7 has a few arguments. Even if all my material body was non-existent, I find that I still feel assured of my existence. Also, that just seems like wishful thinking. Possibly even it's a religious claim, seems like that too. Awareness can exist without a body. The awareness of my existence is not dependent on material things like senses. That seems naive. Like, how can you be aware of yourself without senses? That I don't know, but I mean, it's probably a religious claim anyway. All right, last argument in section 7, knowledge which I have of myself is distinct from my sensory perceptions. That statement is just baffling. How could you know yourself without without observing yourself, it's just, I don't understand how he slipped that one in there. And then section 16, he goes through some arguments, the last one being using Occam's razor, which just means he's trying to go to the simplest explanation. Now, the first one's just an assumption. The intellect is distinct from the sensing body. He's suggesting that's his assumption. Thought is different than senses. That's also an assumption that you can think without a brain. And my own mind is more easily or clearly apprehended, and more clearly apprehended things are more likely to exist. That's also an assumption that he makes. And but this is the Occam razor where he's trying to go to the simplest explanation. And yeah, all just assumptions. So let's go into the possibilities for the assignment. Paragraph 1, as I've suggested, that you could discuss Descartes, why Descartes does what he does, why he says what he says. That's possibly Descartes sets out to establish that the mind exists and has a distinct constitution from the body. That appears to be what he's doing. And he seemed to desire to establish that the mind is superior to the body. For what reason, we don't know. Paragraph 2, Descartes discredited the body by discrediting the senses. He demonstrated the inferiority of the senses with his inductive dilemma, which he went through. Either the senses are inferior because they're deceived, since material objects are not real, or even if real, objects are not definitively knowable using the senses. That was a dilemma. Thus, while empirical observations indicate that people are rational animals, this is an inductive inference and can be doubted. To him, Descartes, this dilemma establishes the inferiority of the bounded senses compared to the immaterial and less bounded intellect. Finally, using deductive reasoning, Descartes, paragraph 3, the suggestion for that, using deductive reasoning, Descartes deduced that a thinking thing must exist. That seems like a good deductive argument. I wouldn't argue against that. Descartes knew with perfect certainty then that his individual self only exists as a thinking thing. The problem is, what is a thinking thing? Descartes used what he hoped was deductive reasoning to infer further that this thinking thing is an immaterial mind. But it appears that he was based on observations and religious ideas more than deductive reasoning to make that claim. His proposal for a substance dualism argument is riddled with assumptions, misunderstandings, reliance on possibly revelations from God that he thinks. Well, there's problems with it. So again, going through the example that I'm suggesting, first paragraph, the reason Descartes affirmed that he is a thinking thing and denied that people are rational animals appears to be to establish that minds and bodies are distinct substances from one another. Further, that minds are superior to bodies. Second paragraph, Descartes rejected that humans are rational animals because that is an inductive conclusion that relies on the inferior substance, that is, the body and its senses. Last paragraph, Descartes utilized deductive reasoning, which relies on mind instead of the senses, to prove that a thinking thing, exists. Believing, probably naively, that thinking can occur without a brain, he proposed that this thinking thing is an immaterial mind. And then this latter argument was conspicuously not deductive. Hopefully that helps you. That's all I have time for. Thanks for your time.